Hi, I'm Steve, and anyone in the UK knows just what a mess our selected, or rather elected, MPs have got themselves and us into. The referendum was over 3 years ago now, and in that time we seem to have achieved nothing positive, but have used the time to dig in and entrench positions and divide our society even more. Both sides have behaved very selfishly, putting party political and their own feelings and self-interests ahead of the country, in my view. All the while, of course, thinking up reasonable sounding cover stories about how they're only taking the position they are for the good of the country. Maybe true of some, but it's not true of most. Anyway, in this video, I want to look at what the future holds, whether we end up leaving or whether we end up remaining in the EU on exactly the same basis that we were in before, which is seeming to be increasingly likely. As I record this on the 13th of September, the Remain camp, certainly in legal and parliamentary terms, seem to be gaining the upper hand. So what next? Well, the screen share I want to put up in front of you now shows you the socio-economic groups as at the 2011 census, which are compiled by the UK Office for National Statistics. In it, we can see that the top two groups, the A's and B's, or what we would have called in the old days the upper classes and the upper middle classes, they constitute 22% of the population. The C1 group, the middle class, if you like, constitute 31% of the population. The C2 group, the lower middle class, constitutes 21%, and the bottom two groups, the D's and the E's, which are the lower classes and the unemployed, constitute 26% of the population. Interestingly, the tables are drawn up aggregating the A's and B's together in one group, and also the D's and E's together in one group. And I don't know why that is. Probably just easier from the point of view of the definitions the Office for National Statistics use, but it's useful because when we look at the next slide, this is very pertinent. But importantly, let's remember those splits of percentage of the population. Now, I'm just going to swap us over briefly to another slide that I want to show you, which hopefully you can see now. So this shows the breakdown of how people voted in the referendum by sex, age, and these socio-economic groups. Now, I'm going to ignore the sex and age numbers for now because, frankly, the reasons for those splits are pretty obvious. But I want to concentrate on what we've been talking about so far, which is the socio-economic groups. We can see that the A's and B's voted 57% to 43% to remain. Interestingly, while that's a significant difference, it's not, I would suggest, overwhelmingly in favour of remain. And when I say remain, of course, perhaps we could say voting for no change. But the D's and E's, the lower socio-economic groups, they voted 64 to 36% to leave. That's almost 2/3 of the lowest socio-economic groups voting for major change. And of course, it is a major change to leave the EU. I mean, we know that, and we were told that constantly during the referendum and have been told it constantly in the media ever since. Even more interestingly, though, the C2s, the lower middle class, also voted leave by the same large margin. And possibly of most interest of all of them is that the C1s, the aspiring A's and B's, if you like, voted in favour of leave. Only by 51 to 49, yes, but still, all the socio-economic groups, other than those at the very top, had a majority who voted leave. Does this not give us cause for grave concern? The only socio-economic group with a majority wanting to remain in the EU are the A's and B's. The financially very secure folk, the wealthy. Even those who can expect to move into the A-B category at some point, the C1s, had a majority voting leave. So my question to the A and B Remainers, because they're the ones both in Parliament and in the media who are essentially, whatever they may claim, agitating to make sure we remain. My question is, if you use your wealth and influence to stop Brexit and we end up remaining in the EU on exactly the same terms as before the referendum, what do you think will happen then? Do you really think the lower socioeconomic groups will just shrug and say, well, it was a nice try, let's just go back and continue as if nothing has happened? Even though the unhappiness and the sense of grievance that caused them to vote leave in the first place, they won't have been addressed. I'm not talking about the EU or our place in it now. I'm really concerned about our society here in the UK, the one we actually live in, the one which has to work coherently for our economy to function properly and for our democracy to function properly. At least, and whether I like it or not, the Brexiteers have got a referendum victory on their side, a victory by 1.3 million votes in the largest turnout for a democratic vote ever seen in the UK. So my question is, what's your end game, Remainers of the A and B upper classes? What's your plan for the aftermath of your top-down imposed victory? The same is true for the Brexiteers, of course. What plans do they have to keep our society functioning if we leave with half the country unhappy? None of the politicians or the influential people in the media have given these things a second thought. It's just win at all costs. Afterwards, well, what will be, I presume. Well, that's not good enough. You know, I've seen some social media posts that actually go as far, and these are from people who think of themselves as decent, reasonable, sane people, that go as far as likening what's happening in Westminster to the rise of the Nazis. Now, Boris Johnson is a complete buffoon, but he's not Hitler. That's just exaggerated rhetoric that presumably makes those people feel as if they're being clever, or maybe it's a ruse to panic other people into action, galvanize other people into action by exaggerating. But no one who doesn't simply dislike Boris Johnson and wants a different government altogether would say that. Because anyone that looks at the history of the rise of the Nazis in the 30s knows that the main reasons that Hitler was able to come to power via the democratic process, remember, it wasn't a coup, it was via the democratic process, was because the economy of the Weimar Republic collapsed, plus the feelings of national resentment and humiliation over the war reparations. The two combined such that many people felt driven towards Hitler's rhetoric of nationalistic victimhood and anger, but with hope for the future because the mainstream politicians had no plan to help them. Now, if you don't believe me, if you think those weren't the main reasons why Hitler came to power, then check out the BBC website, for example. That's hardly a right-wing website, the BBC, and that says the same main causes as I've just explained. Now, fortunately, our economy has not collapsed and is in fact doing pretty well despite the political turmoil, all things considered. Now, the danger I see to our democracy is not clear and present economically. And if I see tangible evidence that leads me to conclude that we are losing any democratic rights, I'll be there complaining, along with those currently making a mountain out of a molehill about a short prorogation of Parliament by a Prime Minister who doesn't even have a majority in the House of Commons. In reality, there are as many differences as parallels to the rise of the Nazis in Johnson's prorogation of Parliament. You know, the parallels are not just clear-cut by any means. The bigger danger, by far, surely the bigger danger by far, and one which seems to be bypassing the commentators, whether social media amateurs or mainstream media professionals, they would call themselves, is in the socio-economic and democratic deficit that the referendum result and the reaction to it over the last 3 years has highlighted. And why is this being ignored? Well, because, as I said earlier, the politicians and the people in the media and the people in the A and B socio-economic group category, too many of them are only really interested in their side winning and them personally coming out of it looking good. This socio-economic and democratic divide is where a more extreme party might gain traction. Now, whether that's through societal unrest at the overturning or the ignoring of the Leave vote, or on the other side, the consequences of leaving, having failed to plan for the possibility of a no-deal Brexit for the last 3 years. But if our economy nosedives, then there is every chance that the lower socioeconomic groups will turn to those voices telling them that they are right to be angry and to see themselves as victims, and promising them a better future if only they'll vote them in. Now, I'm not likening the Scottish National Party to Hitler, of course I'm not, or of course in their case it would be Stalin, because they're way to the left. But let's think how they got to power in Scotland. They outflanked the Labour Party on the left politically, while pushing an anti-Westminster nationalistic pride agenda. And the result? Labour, from having owned Scotland politically 20 years ago, is verging on extinction in Scotland now. And the same could happen in England, you know, especially in the Midlands and the North, which are the areas of the country which predominantly voted Leave. With the Labour leadership seemingly siding not with the C2s, the Ds and the Es of their traditional heartlands in the Midlands and the North, but with the Remainer As and Bs in the south of England, and with the Conservative Party hopelessly divided and not socially conservative anyway, the time could be ripe for a right of centre party to step in and hoover up the C2, D and E votes, which, remember, are in and of themselves almost 50% of the population. And how do people get into, how do political parties rather get into power currently at a general election? 35, 36, 37% will normally do it for you. So is that what we want? Because that's where we're headed if people don't stop the closed-minded hatred and sit down together to work out how we can compromise to keep our society together. You can't convince other people to change their position to yours without any loss to yourself. Not quickly, anyway. Unless you're prepared to give something you care about up, they won't give you anything either. Now, what any compromise position could be, you know, I don't profess to have a silver bullet here. It could be something similar to Theresa May's EU deal, perhaps with more control over our borders, and that deal pleased neither side, I know, but you know, it's got to be worth having another go at it. But far more important than our relationship with the EU is dealing with our own people in our own society. That's the one thing that this debacle has surely shown us. We are divided as much now as we were when we had the last major societal strife in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And we must find ways to bring us back together again. Until the Es and the Ds and the C2s and even quite a lot of the C1s feel included again, The precise nature of our relationship with the EU is frankly of secondary importance. Or maybe you think that's too simplistic. Maybe it's issues stemming from the EU, the obvious example being, open borders. Maybe that's actually the main catalyst for our socio-economic divisions. The feelings from the top groups that immigration is most definitely a net positive, with the opposite feeling from the lower socio-economic groups, the A's and B's who rarely encounter immigrants other than well-educated professional ones, or the Polish plumber once a year, think the lower classes are just racist bigots. Now, the lower groups, who often do have to live alongside a much larger number of immigrants than the A's and B's ever see, think that the A's and B's have no knowledge of the difficulties they face and seem to care even less. It's just a bloody mess. Well, I'd love to know what you think. Constructive thoughts, please. Others will be ignored. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.